Welcome to HOA Rejected. The guest pass was real, and she still called it fake. You do not need to understand it, you need to comply. Rachel Young stood 5 feet from my driver door in the drizzle, one hand gripping a megaphone, the other pointing at my rear tire like it was evidence in a murder trial. She yelled that if I called the police, she would tow my car while I waited. I had my phone already dialing, rain beating on the screen, and I could see her whistle bouncing on the lanyard around her neck, ready to summon whoever she thought counted as backup. My name is Daniel Reeves. I work as a Veteran Affairs Benefits Counselor in Lexington, Kentucky, and my license depends on staying out of legal trouble. Any accusation that sticks, any formal complaint that lands on the state board, and I am done. Rachel knew that. She is the records custodian for the Enclave at Stonegate Design Review Association, which means she controls every document, every notice, every timeline, and she had been using that power like a weapon for 3 months. The fight started when a neighbor reported my car was too loud during a morning start, and Rachel turned it into a parking violation with fake dates and recycled photos. Now she was threatening a tow in my own driveway while I had a deputy on the way, and she was treating the whole thing like a performance. She blew the whistle twice. A board member named Carl appeared from around the corner, hands in his pockets, pretending he was just walking his dog, but clearly watching the whole thing. Rachel pointed at my rear tire again. There's chalk on it. That proves you moved it after the notice. I looked down. There was a faint white line across the tread, barely visible in the drizzle. I have not moved this car in 2 days, I said. She smiled, the kind of smile that says she already won. The rules do not care about your excuses, and neither do I. That line was her catchphrase, and she had been using it in every email, every hearing, every time someone tried to push back on her enforcement blitz. The police arrived 4 minutes later. Deputy Harris stepped out, rain jacket already soaked, and Rachel immediately switched modes. She walked toward him holding a clipboard like it was a court order. Officer, this resident has violated multiple parking covenants, and we have documented proof of intent to evade enforcement. Harris looked at me, then at her, then at the clipboard. He did not touch it. Ma'am, this is a civil matter unless there is a criminal trespass or a safety issue. Do you have a tow authorization from the property owner? Rachel blinked. I am the records custodian for the HOA. I have the authority. Harris shook his head. That is not what I asked. Rachel switched tactics. She turned to Carl, still standing 10 feet away, and told him to witness that I was refusing to comply. Carl nodded, but did not say anything. Harris told her he could only stay a few minutes before another call, and if she wanted to pursue a civil tow, she needed to follow county procedures. Rachel said the HOA had a contract with a tow vendor, and they were already on the way. I felt my stomach drop. If a tow truck showed up, and she convinced them to hook my car, I would be fighting this from a tow yard with a $300 release fee and a formal complaint on my record before I could prove anything. I pulled out my phone and opened the recorder app, but the battery icon flashed red. 18%. I had been recording every interaction with Rachel for weeks, burning through battery like it was a second job, and now I was about to lose the one tool that had kept me safe. I switched to low power mode and kept the screen turned away so Rachel would not see the dying charge. Harris said he had to leave. He looked at me and said if the tow company shows up, ask to see their authorization and call the non-emergency line if it looks wrong. Then he got in his cruiser and left, and I was alone in my driveway with Rachel and Carl, and the sound of a diesel engine rumbling closer. The tow truck pulled in, a battered white Ford with a wheel lift, and a magnetic sign that said Quick Response Towing. The driver climbed out, a guy in his 40s with a reflective vest and a handheld scanner clipped to his belt. Rachel walked up to him like she was directing traffic. This vehicle, she said, pointing at my car. Unauthorized overnight parking in a guest zone. The driver looked at her, then at me, then at the car. He pulled out his phone and made a call. I could hear him talking to dispatch, asking for confirmation on the authorization. Rachel stood next to him, arms crossed, whistle swinging. The driver hung up. He looked at Rachel. Dispatch says we need a signed authorization from the property owner, or the HOA management company, not just a board member. Rachel stiffened. I am the records custodian. I have the authority to enforce violations. The driver shook his head. Ma'am, we have had issues with this HOA before. We need a signature and a copy of the rule. Rachel pulled out her phone and started scrolling, her face tight. She was looking for something, and I knew exactly what. The fake violation notices she had been sending out for months, the ones with altered dates and recycled photos, the ones I had been collecting and comparing against my own records. I stepped closer. I want to see the authorization too. Rachel spun around. You do not get to demand anything. You are in violation, and this is enforcement. The driver held up a hand. Actually, he does. If he is the vehicle owner, he has a right to see the paperwork before we hook it. I can put you on the agenda and keep you there, Rachel said, her voice rising. That was her boomerang line, the threat she used on anyone who fought back, and I had heard it twice before in emails. She meant she could drag this out, pile on fines, keep me locked in hearings and appeals until I gave up or made a mistake. But I watched her pile on threats, because that is exactly what I needed her to do. The driver made another call. This time he put it on speaker, and I heard a woman's voice from dispatch. Quick response. What is the issue? Driver said we need an authorization for a TOW at Stonegate, and the HOA contact is not providing a signed document. There was a pause. We are not authorized to proceed without proper documentation. If the HOA wants to pursue this, they need to submit the request through the management company portal. Rachel lunged forward. That is unacceptable. We have a contract. The dispatcher's voice stayed calm. Ma'am, the contract requires compliance with county towing regulations. We will not proceed without authorization. The call ended. Rachel stood there, whistle swinging, face pale under the drizzle. The driver climbed back into his truck. I am sorry, but I cannot help you. He backed out slowly, amber light sweeping across the wet pavement, and Rachel watched him go like she had just lost a war. Carl turned and walked away, still pretending he had not seen anything. I stood in my driveway, phone battery at 14%, and realized I had just survived round 1. Rachel turned back to me. This is not over. You are going to get a formal notice, and when you do, you are going to pay every fee and every fine, and if you fight it, I will make sure you are on every agenda until you move out or go broke. I did not say anything. I just held my phone low, screen turned away, and let her keep talking. She pulled out her own phone and took a picture of my car, then another picture of the chalk mark, then a third picture of the driveway angle, like she was documenting a crime scene. The rules do not care about your excuses, and neither do I, she said again, and then she walked off toward her house 3 doors down. I went inside, plugged in my phone, and pulled up every document I had been collecting. I work with veterans who depend on getting their benefits paperwork right, and I know how to build a case. I had 3 months of emails, violation notices with conflicting dates, photos that showed the same license plate angles taken weeks apart but labeled as same-day proof, and a city parking officer's written statement that the HOA had misrepresented a county fire lane ordinance in a formal complaint. That last one was my evidence type, the thread I had been pulling since week 2. Rachel had claimed my car was parked in a fire lane, and when I contacted the city, they confirmed in writing that the area in question was not a designated fire lane under county code, and the HOA had no authority to create one without city approval. The phone rang. It was my ally, a board member named Sandra, who had been scared to speak up, but finally agreed to testify. She had seen Rachel altering violation dates in the record system and had screenshots, but she was terrified Rachel would retaliate. Daniel, she said, her voice shaking. I heard about the tow truck. Are you okay? I am fine. The driver would not do it without proper authorization. There was a long pause. Rachel is telling people you threatened her. I felt my chest tighten. That is a lie. Sandra sighed. I know, but she is going to use it. She is already drafting a formal complaint to the management company, and she is going to claim you created a hostile environment. I asked Sandra if she would testify at the next board meeting. She said she would, but only if I had proof that Rachel was lying, because otherwise the board would side with Rachel and Sandra would be the next target. I told her I had proof. I had the city's written correction, I had the timeline mismatches, and I had Rachel's own voice on my recordings threatening to tow my car without proper authorization. But I also had something else, something I had not told anyone yet. I had an HOA attorney email refusing to continue after seeing the misconduct. That was my trump card. and I was not going to reveal it until the moment it would flip everything. The next day, I got the formal notice. It came in an envelope with the Enclave at Stonegate logo, and inside was a 2-page violation summary with 5 separate charges: unauthorized overnight parking, guest vehicle without a decal, obstruction of a fire lane, failure to comply with enforcement, and creating a hostile environment toward HOA PERS. Onel. The total fines added up to $850, and the notice said I had 7 days to pay, or the matter would be referred to collections, and a lien would be filed against my property. At the bottom, Rachel had signed her name in blue ink, and next to it was a timestamp, 9:47 a.m., on the day of the tow truck incident. I pulled out my phone and checked the metadata on the photos Rachel had taken in my driveway. The timestamps showed 10:32 a.m. She had backdated the notice by 45 minutes to make it look like the violation was documented before the confrontation. That was the funny karma beat, the moment where Rachel's own timeline proved she was lying. I took screenshots of everything, saved them to 3 different cloud accounts, and sent copies to Sandra. 2 days later, Rachel showed up at my house again, this time with backup. She brought another board member, a guy named Tom, who ran the Architectural Review Committee, and they walked up my driveway like they owned it. Rachel had her handheld radio clipped to her belt, the one she used to summon compliance like she was running a private security force. She knocked on my door, and when I opened it, she was already talking. "We are here to conduct a property inspection for code violations." I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "You do not have the right to enter my property without notice." Rachel held up her phone. "We sent an email this morning. That constitutes notice." I pulled out my phone and checked. The email had been sent at 7:03 a.m., less than 3 hours ago, and it said the inspection would occur today between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. There was no specific time, no request for access, just a blanket claim of authority. Tom looked uncomfortable. He kept glancing at Rachel like he wanted to leave. I told them I was not allowing an inspection without a proper notice period and a clear scope. Rachel smiled. "Then we will document your refusal and add it to the formal complaint." She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of my front door, my porch, my mailbox, my driveway. Tom stood there and watched. Rachel keyed her radio. "This is Rachel. I need documentation of a refusal to comply at 482 Maple Court." A voice crackled back, "Copy that. I will add it to the log." I realized she was creating a paper trail, a record that would make me look uncooperative and hostile, and it did not matter if it was based on lies because she controlled the records. Tom finally spoke up. "Rachel, maybe we should schedule this properly." Rachel ignored him. She walked around the side of my house, stepping onto my lawn, and started taking pictures of my side yard, my fence, my garbage cans. I followed her. "You are trespassing." She did not stop. "This is HOA common area inspection. I own this property." She turned and looked at me. "You own the structure." "The HOA owns the rules." I pulled out my phone and started recording. Rachel saw it and immediately changed her tone. "Sir, you are making me feel unsafe. Tom, I need you to witness this." Tom looked at me, then at Rachel, and I could see him making a choice. He stepped closer to Rachel. "I think we should go," he said quietly. Rachel shook her head. "Not until I document everything." She walked to the back corner of my yard, where the fence met the property line, and took more pictures. Then she walked back to the driveway, keyed her radio again, and said the inspection was complete. She looked at me. "You will be receiving a follow-up notice." Then she left, Tom trailing behind her like a hostage. That night, Sandra called again. "Rachel is saying you followed her around your property in a threatening manner. She is using it to justify an emergency board meeting to discuss your removal from the community." I felt the stakes tighten around me like a noose. If Rachel convinced the board to file a formal complaint with the state, my license would be under review, and even if I won eventually, the damage would be done. Clients would drop me, referrals would dry up, and I would spend months fighting to clear my name. I asked Sandra when the meeting was. "Tomorrow night," she said, 7 p.m. at the clubhouse. I spent the next day preparing. I printed out every violation notice, every email, every photo, every timestamp mismatch. I printed the city's written statement that the HOA had misrepresented the fire lane ordinance. I printed the screenshots of Rachel's backdated notice. And I printed the HOA attorney email, the one that said the attorney was withdrawing from representation after reviewing evidence of procedural misconduct and potential fraud in the enforcement process. That email was my trump card, and I was going to deploy it in front of the entire board and every homeowner in the room, so nobody could bury it. The meeting started at 7. The clubhouse was packed, at least 30 homeowners crammed into a room designed for 15. Rachel sat at the front table with Tom and 2 other board members, and she had her handheld radio on the table in front of her like a prop. The agenda was on a whiteboard behind her, and my name was listed under new business, formal complaint review, and potential enforcement escalation. Sandra was sitting in the back row, hands folded, looking like she wanted to disappear. Rachel called the meeting to order. She read through the agenda fast, skipping over old business and jumping straight to my case. She stood up and held up a folder. We have documented multiple violations from Daniel Reeves, including unauthorized parking, failure to comply with inspections, and hostile behavior toward HOA personnel. The board has reviewed the evidence, and we are recommending immediate escalation to include fines, a lien filing, and a formal complaint to his professional licensing board. The room went silent. A few people looked at me. Rachel smiled. Does the respondent wish to make a statement? I stood up. I walked to the front and set my binder on the table. I opened it to the first page, the violation notice with the backdated timestamp. I held it up so everyone could see. This notice is dated 9:47 a.m. on the day Rachel confronted me in my driveway. I pulled out my phone and held up the screenshot of her photo metadata. Her photos were taken at 10:32 a.m. She documented the violation after the confrontation, then backdated the notice to make it look like she had authority. Rachel's face went red. That is a technical error. I shook my head. It is fraud. I pulled out the next document, the city's written statement. The HOA claimed I was parked in a fire lane. The city confirmed in writing that the area in question is not a designated fire lane, and the HOA has no authority to enforce one. Rachel stood up. That is a misinterpretation of the code. I held up the letter again. This is from the city fire marshal. It is not open to interpretation. Tom shifted in his seat. A homeowner in the second row raised her hand. If the HOA is enforcing fake rules, what else are they lying about? Rachel tried to regain control. She held up her own folder. We have documentation of hostile behavior. Mr. Reeves followed me around his property with a recording device in a threatening manner. I pulled out my phone and opened the video I had recorded during the inspection. I played it on speaker. The audio showed Rachel walking onto my property without permission, ignoring Tom's suggestion to leave, and keying her radio to create a false record. The room erupted. People started shouting questions. Someone demanded to know why Rachel had the authority to conduct surprise inspections. Someone else asked how many other violations were based on backdated notices. Rachel blew her whistle. The sharp blast cut through the noise. Everyone froze. She pointed at me. You are out of order. I looked at her. I can put you on the agenda and keep you there. Her own words, thrown back at her, and the room recognized them. A guy in the front row laughed. That is what she said to me when I challenged a fine last year. Sandra stood up in the back. She said the same thing to me when I asked for a copy of the meeting minutes. Rachel's face went pale. She looked at the other board members. Tom looked away. The other 2 stared at the table. I pulled out the final document, the trump card I had been holding. I held it up. This is an email from the HOA's attorney. He is withdrawing from representation after reviewing evidence of procedural misconduct and potential fraud in the enforcement process. I send it to the board and homeowners at the same time, so nobody can bury it. I pulled out my phone, opened my email, and hit send. 30 phones buzzed at once. If you want to see how far an HOA Karen will go before her own rules destroy her, smash that subscribe button, because this story is about to get wild. Rachel grabbed her radio. This meeting is over. Tom stood up. No, it is not. You do not get to shut this down. Rachel turned on him. I am the record's custodian. I have the authority. Tom shook his head. Not anymore. I am calling for an emergency vote to suspend your authority pending an independent audit. The room exploded again. People started shouting support. Someone seconded the motion. Rachel tried to leave, but a homeowner blocked the door. We are not done. The vote happened right there. 15 people in favor, 2 against, 3 abstentions. Rachel was suspended. Tom took over as interim chair and announced an emergency policy. All enforcement actions would require 2 signatures and documented proof before any tow could be ordered. The meeting did not end until almost 10 p.m., and by the time I walked out, Rachel was sitting in her car in the parking lot, alone, staring at her phone. The next morning, Sandra called me. The management company is launching a full audit. They found 3 other homeowners who were charged fake fines based on backdated notices, and 2 of them are talking about a lawsuit. Rachel resigned last night. She sent an email at 2 a.m. saying she was stepping down for personal reasons. I asked Sandra what happened to the tow vendor. She laughed. Quick Response Towing sent a letter to the HOA terminating the contract. They said they would not work with an association that tried to force unauthorized tows. A week later, I got a call from the regional supervisor at the management company. Mr. Reeves, we have completed our review. All fines and violations against you have been vacated. The board has adopted an emergency policy requiring 2 signatures and documented proof before any enforcement action, and we are requiring all board members to complete ethics training before they can resume duties. He paused. I want to apologize on behalf of the company. This should never have happened. I asked about Rachel. He sighed. Miss Young is no longer affiliated with the HOA in any capacity. We have referred the matter to our legal team, and they are reviewing whether to pursue action for fraud and misrepresentation. I hung up and stood in my driveway, the same spot where Rachel had threatened me with a tow, and I realized it was finally over. 2 weeks later, the board held a special meeting to adopt the new enforcement policy. Sandra was there, and so was Tom, and about 20 homeowners who wanted to make sure the changes stuck. The policy was clear. No violation could be enforced without 2 board signatures, photographic evidence with verified timestamps, and written confirmation from the management company. Any tow authorization had to be approved by the management company and documented in writing before the vendor was contacted. The board voted unanimously to adopt it, and the HOA froze enforcement pending a full policy rewrite. The final piece of karma came a month later. A new homeowner moved in 3 doors down, into Rachel's old house. She had sold it fast, under market value, and moved out of state. The new owner found a box in the garage, left behind in the rush, and it was full of old violation notices and printed emails. He brought it to the board meeting and opened it in front of everyone. Inside were dozens of notices with altered dates, printed photos with mismatched metadata, and handwritten notes that said things like "make him pay" and "push until he breaks." Sandra took pictures of everything and sent them to the management company's legal team. Tom stood up at the meeting and read one of the notes out loud. The room went silent. Then someone started clapping, and the applause spread. The board voted to forward everything to the county attorney's office, and the management company sent a formal notice to every homeowner, explaining what had happened and apologizing for the abuse. The enclave at Stonegate became a cautionary tale in HOA management circles, the kind of story consultants used to show what happens when one person gets too much power and no oversight. I kept working as a Veteran Affairs Benefits counselor, and my license stayed clean. The state board never received a complaint, and the clients who had been nervous about the HOA drama stayed with me. Sandra ran for the board in the next election and won. She told me later that the first thing she did was implement a public records portal where every enforcement action was posted with timestamps and documentation, so no one could alter anything without leaving a trail. The tow truck threat that Rachel used to control people became the thing that destroyed her. A tow vendor refusing to act without proper authorization was the first crack, and when her own recorded voice played back on speaker at the board meeting, proving she had lied about the timeline and the authorization, the whole structure collapsed. The board adopted the 2-signature rule, the management company cut ties with Rachel, and the homeowners who had been too scared to speak up finally had proof that the system could be fixed. I still live in the enclave at Stonegate. The neighborhood is quieter now, and the portal is full of normal things like garage sale notices and lost pet alerts instead of car photos and accusations. Every time I park in my driveway, I think about that moment when Rachel stood in the rain with her megaphone and her whistle, threatening to tow my car while I waited for the police, and I remember the lesson I learned. The rules do not care about your excuses, but they also do not care about hers. When the evidence is clear and the trump card lands at the right moment, the truth wins. I will see you in the next story.